Can you work in animation even if you don't have any drawing skills? Yes.
One, it's not being afraid of writing things that aren't animation friendly. I think it's like, go to your strong suit, whatever that might be.
Jared Bush is a writer and director known for movies like Encanto, Moana and Zootopia, and the TV show Penn Zero, Part-Time Hero. Today, Jared will tell you about the opening number of Encanto and his experience working on the movie, diving into the challenges of handling so many characters and what animation can add to a film. And if you watch until the end, he'll give you advice on breaking into the industry and give you a tip for developing your characters.
Hi, Jared. Welcome to Write for Animation. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for this.
What were the challenges of having so many characters as a writer?
Oh gosh, many. Luckily, I had an amazing partner, Sharice Castro-Smith, co-writer and co-director of the movie, and of course, my directing partner, Byron Howard. We spent a lot of time really trying to understand the backstory of these characters and really trying to build them as a true family. So I think a lot of ensemble stories, you don't really have to worry about how everyone's connected in quite the same way. For this movie, a big challenge was understanding that we're telling a story of multiple generations living in one place. And so these personalities, like, why would this person marry this person? How would they then parent their children? What would happen there? What's the birth order? How does that affect the way the personalities would express themselves? And so we really spent in the early days a lot of time looking at a family tree and figuring out how all of these things would actually work as if they were a true family. Not worrying, honestly, about whether they had magical gifts or not, but just what are these personalities? Do they make sense? And then, of course, how does Mirabel fit into the middle of that? How does her story inform those relationships? Because obviously her journey throughout this movie is the most important part of it.
The first act, you have this prologue and then the first song of the film. I would love if you could guide us through the song and let us know what it's doing narratively.
Sure. We obviously have the huge benefit of Lin-Manuel Miranda, our amazing songwriter and story partner on this movie. But early on, we knew we had all of these central characters. And historically, it's been really difficult to have a large ensemble like that in an animated movie 5.5 years ago. That was important to the story, and telling this extended family story was something that we really wanted this movie to do. As a result of that, we wanted to protect all of these characters. Very early on, when we got notes saying like, maybe it's just like 5 people in this family, it's not 12. And I remember Lynn saying, no, we can do it, and I can introduce them. Over the course of several years, we screen our movie internally, sort of rough drafts of the movie. And these are always evolving, so it's not like we have it and we're trying to hone it. We're trying a lot of different things, basically. And our very first screening of the 8 screenings over those 5 years, Lynn wrote a version of that song to introduce all the members of the family in a way that hopefully you'd retain who they are, get a sense of their personality, get a sense of what their magical gifts are, and get a sense of the promise of the fun and entertainment of this world. Early on, we knew that's something that was really important. A big change we made actually was that prologue that you mentioned and the song were actually one and the same. So actually the song also had all of the prologue information, but we found that to be very tricky because it's pretty serious, and to have the song cover this tragic backstory, but then also get to the fun of the family, that took us years to separate those things and figure out how to do it in a way that was, but yeah, I can certainly walk you through. Like up front, we knew that we wanted Mirabel to welcome us, the audience, into this story. We also knew that we wanted her to basically be lying to the audience, meaning this whole song is basically her saying, let me tell you about my awesome family so you don't ask about me. In fact, the opening, those kids are outside the window asking, what's your magical gift? And so in a way, the song is just a deflection, which is really fun. That's something we never get to do. And then in fact, the other real big premise of the song is that she's introducing you to these members of the family, and she's also wrong about them. So she's only giving you the 2-dimensional version of who these members of the family are intended to be, or who she understands them to be. And then we just prove that over the course of the story. So understanding those pieces from like a fundamental, what are we going to do with this song, was, I think, one of the biggest pieces we needed to wrap our heads around. And then we began. So structurally speaking, we wanted Mirabel first and foremost we wanted to fall in love with her and her personality, and the sense that she's actually the biggest fan of her family. And so she's very happy to talk about them, even though it's a deflection. So when you first get to see her, she gives you the lay of the land of how these things work. First, there's the introduction of the house itself. She involves Casita. We knew that we wanted to use the house itself as the percussion of the songs. It's moving its floorboards and doors and tiles, and that is the sort of the rhythm percussion that you get at the beginnings. Okay, let's introduce house first and foremost. And then very quickly, Mirabel gives you a basic sense how her family works, that there's sort of these special people. You can even see visually early on there's a family tree. We knew to give people a sense of how many members of the family we were going to meet. But then very quickly, I remember Len saying he wanted to organize it in a way that you understood who Abuela was, and then who the main children were, their spouses, and then their children. So he wanted to build it in a way that was generational. And he thought that would be a great way to organize it. And so when this song begins, you're going around this really cool house and you're seeing, oh, there's these worlds inside of these rooms. I think a big thing was like, we see a little piece of inside Isabella's room. That was actually critical. The idea that like you walk into a room, it's not just a fixed space, it's this enormous thing, was something that we wanted to get across, and we debated, oh, should that be lyrics? Should she tell us? There's these wondrous worlds inside all these places. Ultimately, we felt like the visuals took care of that bit of information for us. But then very quickly, you want to get the sense that this family is great, but they're gifts in service of helping this town. So you get all of this fun within the house, and then the family leaves to go into town to help and to do what they're meant to do there. And to me, that's one of the really fun parts, where you get some of these interactions and you get to see how these gifts work very early on when Mirabel gets down there. And these kids are still harassing her the whole time, which is one of my favorite parts. Like, she then goes through, okay, here's my mom, and she married my dad, and here's Peppa, and she married Felix. And you really get a sense of those personalities. You get the sense of, okay, Peppa is very emotional and her weather can change on a dime depending on her moods. And then you get a sense that she and her mom have this really wonderful, loving relationship. Then you get to see all the family together with Abuela, and how the town really reveres the family and Abuela specifically. She is somewhat not just the matriarch of the family, but like a quasi elder in this village, someone that people really look up to and respond to. And then we get to have the fun of meeting, I think they're even in the lyrics, there's so many people to keep track of. Let me help you with this next part. So we want to shine a light on, we're not done with all this exposition yet. Let me tell you about Camilo. Let me tell you about Dolores. We needed to set up that Antonio is going to get his gift that same day. That was a bit of plot exposition, but it was critical to have that in there. And then you get to the sister dynamic, and you get a sense of, here's Luisa, and she's super strong, and you get the sense that she and Mirabel have a pretty good relationship. A really tricky part was how to introduce Isabella, because we knew that Mirabel was good at pretending that Isabella didn't bother her, but she does. But she's also saying to the audience, look at my great family. So we didn't want to give away that friction too much, but we saved it for a little later, and you can see it really in tiny ways, the way the animators brought in very subtle acting into her character. And then we wanted to build this enormous finale where it felt like, and I've told you everything you need to know, and that's my family, and have a great day, and the song is over. And even when we recorded that on the stage, we made some last minute adjustments, literally while the orchestra was there, to really build up, that's the end of the song, and hopefully trick our audience and these little kids who are asking Mirabel, what's the deal with your family? They'd be done, but then there's that one little kid, and so wait a second, you left yourself out. And that to me is one of my favorite parts, because then the song really starts to speed up, spiral out of control, and that's where Mirabel's ability to trick us and to say, look over there, you start to see that, oh, she wasn't really planning on this part. She did the awesome song, and now she's really desperately trying to avoid this family. And Lynn, I think, had a great idea, which is, instead of just avoiding them, she then goes back through her family one more time, which is comedically great, but it also is like, and remember, here's all the gifts again. So it's a really great deflection, but it also, exposition-wise, helped us immensely, because we got to see everybody again, and it started to get more and more chaotic, and you can hear even the speed of the song starts to go faster and faster as things are really going off the rails. And you get to meet very quickly Mariano, set that story up with him and Isabella and what Mirabel thinks that's going to be. And then ultimately, as she's literally backing up, trying to get away from these kids, she's interrupted, of course, by Abuela, who is, I think, an antagonistic force that we'll see throughout the movie. Of course, that's who busts her and really sets us, I think, in a way, like, we got all the exposition. It was super fun, but something's not quite right. And the answer to the question of what is your gift has still not been given to us, the audience. And that is given to us by Dolores, who says, yep, she did not get a gift, and we're done. So thinking about, it begins with, what's your gift? And she says, I'm going to tell you about everybody else. And then ending with, you didn't get one, was definitely like a sort of the uber construction of the entire song.
That was brilliant. And I love how Mirabel, she's still a clear protagonist.
I think one of the things we found, and Stephanie Beatrice is just such an amazing actor. That song, first off, it's insanely fast. This is true. We went through 3 or 4 accordion players because it's so quick. Like the first time we recorded it, That accordion player like almost passed out. He's like sweating. We had to take a bunch of breaks because Lynn wrote very fast music. But then there's also fast lyrics, and hitting them is very difficult. Stephanie did it great, but it's not just getting the words right. It's all of the acting within it and the quirkiness and the weirdness. If you really listen to her performance as you go through the song, she is also giving you color commentary in the way that she is talking about different members of the family, or you get the sense like, yeah, this is like a little weirdo and I love her, but there's something off about her in a great way.
What was the hardest part to write? And is there anything that you've learned that you wished you knew before?
There's a lot of difficult parts. I think that's one thing I always find stepping into any new story is that you learn all these lessons every time you go through something, but then you get a new story and many of those lessons don't apply. I think that the biggest lesson I always learn is like, it's going to be really hard and you're going to not know where you're going and it's going to be scary. I've done it enough times now where I go, yes, I'm going to feel all those things, but I believe I will then make it through the other side. I have no idea how. I don't have like answers. I just know like, I'm going to feel this way for several months, if not years. And then I will find something because we are all surrounded by an amazing team and collaboration. I'd say for this movie, the argument between Mirabel and Abuela was one of the most difficult sections. And I'd say it was difficult because that dynamic for many people was polarizing in that some people said, oh yes, my grandmother was very hard on me and this feels exactly true to life. And I'm glad that I'm seeing that. And I've lived exactly that. And other people said, my grandmother was always so supportive and so sweet. And I can't imagine a grandmother like this. And so you had those two poles. That's just your own perspective, which is what our movie's about, which is great. I think the tricky part was, culturally speaking, that people wanted Mirabel to finally be able to stand up to Abuela, but she's still someone she deeply respects. And even looking at someone like an elder in that town, Mirabel can't just unload on her. She can't be like super disrespectful because that would feel like you wouldn't actually do that. Even if you wanted to, you wouldn't. And so trying to find a way to give Mirabel the agency in that moment that we wanted her to have as a character and someone who deserves to feel that confidence and say something that matters to her. Doing that plus being respectful, but also understanding Abuela's point of view, all of those things had to happen concurrently. And that took many iterations.
These interviews are made possible by our wonderful community. By joining the WFA Animation Academy, you'll connect with other passionate storytellers who are all about improving their craft. You'll learn new skills, make great connections, and take your career to the next level. Join us today at writeforanimation.com/academy. The links are down below, and I cannot wait to see you in our next session.
As animation writers, sometimes the mistake that we can do is to write something that could be shot as a live action film. One of the elements that stand out in animation, among others, is the non-human characters and how they enrich the story. How is your approach in general as a writer, and maybe taking Casita as an example, because it's a very unique character?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's something that we always think about is like, why does this movie have to be animated? That's day one. That's the question we start with. To be honest, when we first started talking about this story, we wanted it to be a family stories. Early on, myself and Byron and Lynn all got together and we're trying to figure out, what do we all have in common? We're going to tell a story together. What is that thing that we all really relate to? And it was our families. And so early on, there was no magic in our story. We just tell a pure family story. Hey, that's great. But why would it be animated? So the idea that they had these magical gifts came out of why animation. And then as we started to research more, and then we started to really focus on Colombia and this amazing tradition of magical realism, Disney Animation has never tried to do a story that is inspired by that type of magic versus European magic. What does that look like? Magic born out of emotion, magic that is like a bit more tangible and organic, but a lot of times is rooted in character, or a lot of times rooted like a tragedy, like what you find in our prologue. Those things are really important. I'd say like the approach to what are other things to do, certainly animals is a big one. I think there's fun tasks in this movie where we wanted to have animals. We didn't want to have an animal sidekick per se. We didn't want to have animals that could talk, and we didn't want the animals to be overly caricatured because a lot of these animals are real, and in Colombia they are real. We wanted them to have personalities and be able to differentiate between those two things. So I think the beauty of animation is actually in the subtlety. I find that this movie specifically, one of the things that is so impressive is the level of subtle acting that the animators were able to achieve in this story. Sometimes it actually is more, it feels a little bit more live action approach in a couple scenes, specifically Mirabel talking to Antonio underneath her bed. That scene actually truly could be a live action scene. Or Mirabel and her mother talking in the kitchen. That is a very true to life scene that you could see in live action. But we needed that reality because it's magical realism to do the other fantasy. So we wanted to have very grounded real moments and then do things like Antonio going into his room for the first time is pure wish fulfillment. And we wanted that to be just like, oh my gosh, he's riding in the back of a Jaguar. This is amazing. And then like you mentioned, we have this character Casita, this house that itself is magic. And I remember early on, Byron and I talking, like, if it's in this magical place, why would the house not also have magic? I think we both felt anywhere you live, it has a personality, a sense of the people that live there. And what would that be like? And then really thinking through the fun of a house that has its own personality. Charisse always talked about the house is somewhat like the family dog in this movie, which is it wants to help. It doesn't always make great choices. It does have favorites. It does have people that it doesn't like as much. And playing with those dynamics, different members of the family, the house has a different relationship with them was really fun. The big thing that Byron really hit early on that I think helped us a lot was we also wanted the house to feel real and tactile. And that meant that even though the house was alive and animated, we wanted the materials to feel true to life. A floorboard couldn't turn into rubber to make an expression or to do something that felt like, okay, we wanted to emote, but if those materials don't feel like those materials, then it's no longer an actual house. It's a giant rubber house, which we didn't want, right? So tiles have to behave like tiles and wood has to behave like wood. Lights and all those things needed to feel like that's a real house, but it's found a way to communicate with us. That was a big part of it. And I find a lot of the times is that having a limitation like that is actually wonderful because then it makes you really think through how would you do it. And that limitation leads to specificity. And I think that the way that the house's personality comes across is very unique to Encanto, which I love. And as a result of some of those limitations that we placed on ourselves, which I think is why Casita is such a fun character.
Yeah, so unique. Thinking about like us as writers in the industry, many of us, we don't have artistic skills. And this is a question from our amazing audience. And what would be the best way to get into the industry as an outsider somehow, but with a strong passion for animation?
I have zero artistic skills. My artistic skills are a joke. There's artists at Disney that have my artwork on their walls as ironically, because it's hard to sell what it is. I think that many writers, especially people that are drawn to animation, are visual writers. And I'd say that's something that I really enjoy doing, which is when I'm writing a scene on a page, I'm really thinking through what that's going to look and feel like. And I try to write towards that, meaning as opposed to just giving the information, really giving a sense of that visual space. That's something that's, I think, is critical to get into the industry. It's tricky. I'd say when I first started Disney animation, it's 11 years ago, I'd been trying to get into Disney animation for years before that. But as a writer, it's difficult to do so because all of the stories at Disney animation come from within. It's ideas from the filmmakers there. I was very lucky in that Byron Howard was looking for a writing partner for a movie called Zootopia. And I had a meeting with him and it was like a perfect marriage. He and I think very much alike, and it was a story that I loved. And so I got in that way. I think interestingly, the script that he read of mine that got me that meeting was not an animation script. It was like a hard R adult comedy, but it had these character interactions that I think Byron really liked, and he knew that he was interested in for Zootopia. I'd say to find your way in, I think it's a couple things. One, it's not being afraid of writing things that aren't animation friendly. I think it's like go to your strong suit, whatever that might be. One of the things I found over the last decade, bringing other writers into Disney, is it's really about point of view, and it's about voice and understanding what your voice is. Probably the most important thing you can do, so that when someone reads your work, they go, "Oh man, I love this dynamic. This is a very interesting way this person looks at the world. I can't wait to work with that person." So I think like understanding what your voice is, which takes time. It's not easy to do that. Figuring that out, very critical. There are different ways to try to get involved. Obviously, right now, there's many ways to get material out online or streaming on a very limited budget that you can at least get something out into the world. My first animation job was actually for Disney Animation. I pitched a show to Disney XD, Disney Channel, and this is about a year-ish before I went to Disney Animation for Zootopia. That was a great crash course. That's something where I could bring an idea from the outside into Disney, and that was my first real exposure to animation. But I'd say everyone has a different path to get in there. I think passion, super important. You have to love it. You have to know that it's going to take time, and that's okay. And then your voice, understanding who you are and how to put yourself on the page. And so people can see that is important.
Somebody asked, what is your approach after your first draft?
I've actually never been asked that question. I'll tell you my first draft approach first, which informed the answer to this, which is I try to write a first draft as fast as humanly possible and have it be terrible, have it be garbage, like unreadably bad. I do that honestly because I find that if I let myself try to polish a script early or as I'm going through, I never make it past the first act. In a 3-act structure, I'll polish that first act forever. Oh man, I can't wait. Look how great this thing is. And then I'll eventually get to the third act and be like, oh, but that first act's now in the trash because I found this other thing. And so why did I waste all of that time trying to make my first act great when actually the first act is not what the movie needs that I now understand. First draft, I'll literally write as fast as possible just to get to the end. Like in 2 weeks, boom, first draft done. No one can ever read it, ever. I would be embarrassed. And then usually I've now learned something by getting all the way to the end that I didn't know when I started. And that's, I think, a critical piece of that. Once I've now learned that, then I go back to the beginning and I do another full pass all the way through. I try to do that 2 or 3 times all the way through before I let myself go scene by scene or act by act and really try to polish it and make it not awful.
Do you have an outline before that?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, so before that, yes, I spend months and months. I think even more important than outlines for me personally is actually character breakdowns. And I'll go very deep into character psychology, why they are who they are. Even secondary or tertiary characters, I'll really try to understand what their voice is, why that person's here, why would this character interact with our main characters. I'll spend a lot of times doing character bios and just getting a sense of, in any scene, why is this going to be fun or interesting or provocative or emotional, how these characters going to ping off each other. I do that because your plot can change and usually does as you're moving through. But if you've done a really good job and your characters actually remain the same, and that helps you just stick them into a different plot and then great, here's the same characters that I like and that works really well. I think a good example is Zootopia. I spent a lot of time on Nick and Hops, and then about 1.5 years before the movie came out, we literally threw the entire movie in the garbage and started with a different plot, which would be really hard, except that we knew those characters so well, it almost didn't matter. And one of the things we always talked about was it could be any case that they're trying to solve. The dynamic between the two, their points of view about the world was already set. Before I launch into anything, I spend maybe too much time really doing character work, and I'll try a bunch of different versions of outlines. And also, by the way, expand. So I'll do a 10-page version of an outline and then try to do that same outline in 2 pages, because then you go what is all this extraneous information? Right, this is actually not that clear. So I'll also kind of accordion that as well.
That's amazing. I never thought about focusing on the character that way, because the story can change, but the character will remain. That's really great. Thank you so much for your time, Jared. This has been wonderful.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much, Jared, and a big thank you to Disney Animation for setting up this interview. Did you know that Jared Bush co-wrote Moana with the legendary director John Masker? In this video, John Masker shares the 7 secret ingredients for creating unforgettable characters, so you can ensure your audience truly cares about them. I'm Pietro, this is WFA Animation, and I'll see you in the video.